Keep talking. Your voice. It's the only thing keeping me here. The whispered words caught Elena off guard. She paused, the worn notebook half closed in her lap. The hospital's night shift was always quieter, save for the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes against linoleum. But in room 203, the air seemed to thicken with each syllable the man spoke. "You're awake," she said, unconsciously switching from her storytelling voice to her professional one. "I should call the—" "Please," he said, his voice raw. His hand, bruised, with an IV taped to the back, moved toward hers. The gesture lasted only a heartbeat before he pulled back. "Don't stop, not yet." Elena Rivas, MD, prided herself on maintaining professional boundaries. 6 years at Detroit Memorial had taught her that emotional distance was as necessary as surgical gloves. Yet here she was, reading her private stories to an unconscious patient, or so she had thought, during her breaks. The man had been brought in 3 days earlier, found unconscious in an alley behind the restaurant district. No ID, no phone, just expensive clothes soaked through with rain and blood from a head wound. The nurses had nicknamed him Prince Charming for his chiseled features, but Elena had dubbed him John Doe in 203 in her charts. Clinical, detached, safe. "How long have you been listening?" she asked, closing the notebook completely now. The hint of a smile crossed his lips. "Long enough to know the orphan girl in your story deserves better than what that foster family gave her." Elena felt the blood rush to her face. The stories were personal, fragments of her own history, reimagined with kinder endings. Nobody read them. Nobody. "I should check your vitals," she said, standing abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. She moved to the monitors, pretending to study numbers she already knew by heart. His eyes followed her. She could feel them, dark and intent, as if trying to read something written on her skin. "Your temperature's normal," she said finally, looking at him directly. "But your heart rate elevates periodically. It could be a delayed reaction to trauma or it could be you," he interrupted, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena had treated hundreds of patients, wealthy businessmen, charming manipulators, grateful survivors, all who tried to forge connections with their pretty doctor. She knew how to redirect, how to maintain the necessary distance. Yet something in this man's gaze made her feel exposed, as if he had somehow read past the last page of her notebook into the stories she hadn't even written yet. "You have a concussion, possibly some memory issues," she said, professional mask firmly back in place. "Confusion about your surroundings and attachments to caregivers is common. I'm Dr. Rivas. I've been Elena," he said, just her name, not her title. The way he pronounced it, soft E, lingering on the L, sent an inappropriate shiver down her spine. "Do you remember your own name?" she asked, ignoring the sensation. He was silent for a moment. "Not yet," he finally said, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't being entirely truthful. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the dingy hospital room with its peeling paint and outdated equipment. Detroit Memorial was barely staying afloat. Budget cuts, staff shortages, and rumors of a corporate takeover had everyone on edge. "The doctor on call will evaluate you in the morning," Elena said, stepping toward the door. "You should rest." "I've been resting for 3 days," he replied. "Tell me about the hospital instead." Elena hesitated. "What do you want to know?" "Why you're here. Reading stories to a stranger instead of working somewhere that doesn't look like it's one leak away from shutting down." His bluntness surprised her. Patients rarely noticed the hospital's condition, too concerned with their own problems. But he had seen it immediately. "Some of us work where we're needed, not where it's comfortable," she said, unexpectedly defensive. He studied her for a long moment. "The orphan in your story. That was you, wasn't it?" Elena's hand tightened around the doorknob. No one knew that. Part of her life here. She had remade herself, from foster care to scholarship, from medical school to respected physician. The past was locked away, except in her private stories. "I should go," she said, "but you'll come back." It wasn't a question. She should say no, should assign another doctor to his case, should lock the notebook away and stop this inappropriate midnight storytelling. "Your heart rate is increasing again," she noted instead, glancing at the monitor. "I told you why," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. Elena placed her hand on his wrist, ostensibly checking his pulse the old-fashioned way. His skin was warm, too warm for a man who should still be weak from blood loss and trauma. Beneath her fingers, his pulse jumped and raced. "That's not from the concussion," he murmured. She withdrew her hand quickly. "Get some rest, Mr. Just come back tomorrow," he said, his eyes already drifting closed. "With or without the stories, just come back." As Elena closed the door behind her, she realized she was still clutching her notebook against her chest, like a shield, or a secret, or a promise. What troubled her most wasn't his request. It was that she already knew she would grant it. "Luke," he said when Elena entered the room, sunlight streaming through half-drawn blinds. "Call me Luke." 2 weeks had passed since their midnight conversation. His bruises had faded from purple to yellow, and the stitches above his temple were ready to be removed. Whatever had brought this man to her hospital remained a mystery, but at least now he had a name, even if Elena suspected he'd invented it. "Luke," she repeated, testing the sound. "Any last name to go with that?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Not yet." She'd grown used to his vague answers, the way his eyes followed her around the room, the subtle change in his breathing whenever she approached his bed. Protocol dictated she should have transferred his case to another doctor days ago, but somehow, his file remained on her desk. "I brought you something," she said, pulling a paperback from her lab coat pocket. "Since you're well enough to stay awake now." He took the book, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact was brief but electric. "The Sheltering Sky," he read, tracing the worn cover with unexpected reverence. "Bowles." "You know it?" Elena asked, surprised. "Because we don't know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well," he quoted, his voice taking on a resonant quality she hadn't heard before. Elena stared at him. That passage, it was one she'd read to him when she thought he couldn't hear, from her own copy, not this hospital library edition. "You remember?" she said, not a question. "Everything," he replied simply. Every word. A knock at the door spared her from responding. Miguel, a 10-year-old with chronic kidney disease, peered around the doorframe. "Dr. Elena, can I show Luke my new drawing?" The boy had taken to visiting room 203 during his dialysis breaks. Luke, to Elena's surprise, engaged with Miguel in a way few adults bothered to, asking questions about his art, listening with genuine interest. "Come in, artist," Luke called, his face transforming with warmth. As Miguel scampered to the bedside, Elena noticed the transfer papers on her clipboard. The hospital couldn't afford to keep treating the boy without insurance. He would be moved to a county facility by month's end. "It's a dragon," Miguel explained, spreading his drawing across Luke's lap. "But he's friendly. See his smile." Fearsome and friendly, Luke nodded approvingly. The best combination. Elena watched them, a strange ache forming in her chest. Luke could be leaving soon, too. His physical recovery was nearly complete, and without insurance or identification, the hospital administrator had been making noise about discharge. After Miguel left, Elena checked Luke's vitals, a routine she'd performed dozens of times, yet it felt different today. His heartbeat quickened under her touch, just as it always did. "When will you tell me who you really are?" she asked, not looking up from his chart. "When will you tell me why you hide those stories in your notebook?" he countered. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of secrets kept. "Dr. Rivas to the ER, stat. the intercom crackled. "Dr. Rivas to the ER. Go," Luke said. "Save someone." 3 a.m. found Elena alone in the staff elevator, heading to the locker room after a brutal shift. A car accident had brought in 4 critical patients, and she'd spent hours in surgery. Her shoulders ached, her mind numbed. All she wanted was her bed. The elevator jolted to a stop between floors. "Perfect," she muttered, jabbing the alarm button. Nothing happened. Budget cuts had affected even basic maintenance. She slumped against the wall, too exhausted to panic. The emergency phone would alert security eventually. For now, she was simply grateful for the quiet. When the doors slid open minutes later, Luke stood on the other side in a hospital robe. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she said automatically. "Neither should you," he replied, stepping inside. The doors closed behind him. The elevator remained motionless. They stood facing each other in the small space, his bare feet and patient wristband a stark reminder of boundaries she shouldn't cross. "You look exhausted," he said, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered on her cheek. Elena knew she should step back, maintain professional distance. Instead, she leaned into his palm. "Luke," she whispered, a warning or an invitation. He answered by drawing her closer, one hand cradling her face, the other settling at her waist. When his lips met hers, Elena forgot the hospital, the elevator, the years of careful professional boundaries. She pressed against him, fingers tangling in his hair, feeling his heart race against her chest. The kiss deepened, urgent and honest. His hands moved to her back, pulling her closer, as if trying to eliminate any space between them. For long moments, there was only this, their shared breath, exploring touches, the release of tension built over weeks of careful restraints. When a mechanical whir signaled the elevator's revival, Luke pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. "I want to touch you properly," he murmured against her lips. "Not between emergency alarms or hospital interruptions." The elevator lurched upward. They separated reluctantly, composing themselves before the doors opened. "Your locker," Luke said as they stepped into the empty hallway. "Check it before you leave." Inside her locker, Elena found a leather-bound copy of a book she'd mentioned once while reading to him. A rare first edition she'd seen only in library archives. A note slipped between the pages read simply, "For the stories yet to be written," she sank onto the bench, running her fingers over the gilt-edged pages. How had he obtained this? Who was this man who quoted literature from memory and kissed her like she was the ending to a story he'd been searching for? At home, exhaustion forgotten, Elena opened her laptop. A notification caught her eye, a message from a literary forum she occasionally browsed. Someone had published one of her stories online, the very one she'd read to Luke that first night. The post had dozens of comments. At the top, pinned by the mysterious poster, was a note. These words saved me. A grateful reader. Elena stared at the screen, her lips still burning from his kiss, her mind racing with suspicion and wonder. Who was Luke? And what else did he know about her that she hadn't willingly shared? "Tell me who you are." Elena stood in the doorway of room 203, clutching a printed page in her hand. "And don't say Luke again." The room had transformed over the weeks. Cards from nurses and patients, mostly Miguel, decorated the walls. Books lined the windowsill. Luke sat in the visitor's chair rather than the bed, dressed in clothes that had appeared as mysteriously as the rare book, expensive but understated, like the man himself. "You found your stories online," he said, not a question. Elena closed the door behind her. 12 of them, all posted by someone called Grateful Reader. "All stories I read to you when you were supposedly unconscious." He didn't deny it. "They deserve to be shared. They weren't yours to share." The anger in her voice surprised even her. "Those stories are private, personal. They're beautiful," he countered, like their author. 3 weeks of careful touches, lingering glances, and one stolen kiss in an elevator had eroded her professional distance. Now, confronted with this invasion of privacy, Elena felt something else crumbling, her trust. I want to know who you are, right now, or I'm calling security. Luke stood, moving toward her with that fluid grace that still seemed impossible for someone who'd been unconscious just weeks ago. You already know who I am. No, she said, backing against the door. I know you appeared with no identification. I know you listened differently than anyone I've ever met. I know your hands. She stopped, heat rising to her face. My hands? He prompted softly. Elena swallowed. I know your hands feel like they've never done manual labor. I know you recognize rare books and quote obscure literature. I know you could have left this hospital a week ago, but you're still here. He was close enough now that she could smell the hospital soap on his skin, mixed with something distinctly him. Paper and rain and possibility. What I don't know, she continued, voice dropping, is why you're lying to me. If I tell you everything, he said, reaching for her hand, you might hate me. I might hate you anyway. His smile was sad. Fair enough. Before he could continue, Elena's pager buzzed. She glanced down. Miguel's room number flashed on the screen with a 911 code. I have to go, she said, yanking the door open. Elena, Luke called after her. I'll be here, when you're ready to hear it all. Miguel stabilized after a seizure caused by a medication reaction. As Elena updated his chart, the boy's aunt approached her in the hallway. They're moving him next week, the woman said, eyes rimmed red. The county hospital doesn't have the specialist he needs. Elena squeezed the woman's shoulder. I'm fighting it. We all are. But they were losing, like so many battles at Detroit Memorial. Exhaustion pressed on her as she finished her shift. She should go home, should forget about the man in room 203, with his secrets and stolen stories. Instead, her feet carried her back to his door. The room was empty. Luke was gone. The books, the cards, all of it cleared away as if he'd never existed. Only the lingering scent of him remained. On the freshly made bed lay a folded note. Roof. 10 p.m. Please. The hospital rooftop was technically off limits, but generations of overworked staff had created a makeshift retreat there. Plastic chairs, potted plants long dead, even a weather-beaten coffee table, all abandoned like the hopes of the hospital itself. Luke stood at the edge, looking out over Detroit's scattered lights. He'd changed into a suit that fit him too well to be borrowed. You came, he said without turning. I almost didn't, but curiosity won out. Elena leaned against the doorframe. Or maybe I just wanted to know how you accessed our secure servers, to post my stories. He turned then, moonlight catching the angles of his face. I don't have the technical skills for that. Then who does? People who work for me. The admission hung between them. Elena felt something shift, the first fragment of truth breaking through. You're wealthy? She said. Not a question. He nodded once. Wealthy enough to disappear without ID. Wealthy enough to have rare books delivered. Wealthy enough to have people. Another nod. Elena pushed off from the door, walking toward him slowly. Why are you here in this falling apart hospital? Why pretend you don't remember who you are? Because the man who woke up in your hospital isn't the same one who was brought in, he said quietly. Because when I heard your voice reading those stories, something broke open that I'd kept shut for years. She stopped an arm's length away. That's poetic, but not an answer. I know. The night air wrapped around them, carrying distant sirens and the scent of coming rain. Elena felt the weight of her exhaustion, her confusion, the pull of this man who'd somehow slipped past all her defenses. I'm tired, she whispered. tired of mysteries and half-truths. Luke closed the distance between them, his hands finding her waist. Then let me give you one complete truth. His mouth met hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity. Unlike the desperate elevator kiss, this was deliberate, his hands cradling her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. She felt herself surrender, arms winding around his neck, body pressing against his as if seeking shelter. His kisses traveled from her lips to her jaw, her neck, lingering at the pulse point where her heart betrayed her. His hands moved to her, back, tracing the curve of her spine through her thin shirt. "Elena," he breathed against her skin. She tangled her fingers in his hair, guiding his mouth back to hers. They sank onto one of the abandoned chairs, Elena straddling his lap, her lab coat falling open around them. His hands slipped beneath her shirt, warm against her bare skin. "This doesn't solve anything," she murmured against his mouth. "No," he agreed, trailing kisses down her throat. "But it's still true." The heat between them built, hands exploring with growing urgency. When his fingers traced the edge of her bra, Elena pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Not here," she said, breathing hard. "Not until I know who's touching me." Luke rested his forehead against hers. "Fair enough." As they disentangled reluctantly, a folded paper fell from his jacket pocket. Elena picked it up, a torn photograph. Before Luke could stop her, she unfolded it. The face was unmistakable, the same dark eyes that had watched her for weeks. But the name beneath made her blood freeze. Elliot Blake, the reclusive billionaire author who had vanished months ago. "You're him," she whispered, photograph trembling in her hand. Luke, Elliot, didn't deny it. "Now you understand why I couldn't tell you." "You own this hospital," she said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "The budget cuts, the transfer orders, the takeover rumors." Her voice hardened. "Was I just part of your research?" "Elena, don't." She backed away, dropping the photograph like it burned. "Whatever this was, it's over." She fled the rooftop, his voice calling after her, the taste of him still on her lips. 3 days. Elena had successfully avoided him for 3 days. She requested shift changes, sent residents to check his room, and buried herself in paperwork whenever she wasn't treating patients. But Elliot Blake, not Luke, never Luke again, was no longer in room 203 anyway. According to the nurses, he had checked himself out the morning after their rooftop encounter. Good. Let him return to his mansion, his wealth, his secret identity. Let him find another doctor to manipulate. Elena slammed a patient file onto the counter of the nurses' station, earning concerned glances from the staff. "Dr. Rivas?" The voice belonged to Nurse Tara. "Miguel's asking for you, and Mr. Blake left something for you." "I don't want anything from him." Tara hesitated. "It's about Miguel's transfer. You might want to see this." Reluctantly, Elena followed, her to the pediatric wing. Miguel's room was decorated with get-well cards and the colorful drawings that had once adorned room 203. The boy was asleep, his small chest rising and falling beneath a Spider-Man blanket. "His transfer was canceled," Tara whispered, handing Elena a document. "He's been approved for an experimental treatment program. All expenses covered." Elena scanned the paperwork. The sponsoring organization was the Blake Foundation. "There's more," Tara added, producing a sealed envelope. "This came for you." Elena slipped the envelope into her pocket, unwilling to open it with an audience. She checked Miguel's vitals, brushed his hair from his forehead, and whispered a promise to return later. In the solitude of the on-call room, she finally tore open the envelope. Inside was a simple note. "Elena, I owe you the truth. Not just about who I am, but who I was before you found me," the manuscript explains. EB beneath the note was a thumb drive labeled Silent Rounds. Elena waited until she was home, curled on her couch with a glass of wine, before plugging the drive into her laptop. A single document opened, a manuscript with her name on the dedication page. For ER, who saved more than just my life. The title, Silent Rounds, made her stomach clench. Luke, Elliot, had been listening to her hospital rounds even when supposedly unconscious. How much had he overheard? How much had she revealed, thinking she was speaking to an unhearing patient? She began to read. The manuscript wasn't about her rounds at all. It was about her, not directly. The protagonist had a different name, a different hospital, but the character's history mirrored Elena's own. The orphaned girl, the foster homes, the determination to become a doctor despite every obstacle. Details she had shared only in the stories she read to him, thinking he couldn't hear. Her finger hovered over the delete key. This was another violation, another manipulation. Then she saw it, a chapter titled Awakening. It described the moment Elliot Blake regained consciousness after an attack that had nearly killed him. An attack he had arranged himself. Elena read with growing horror as Elliot described his plan: to fake his own death after years of isolation and creative drought, to disappear completely from his suffocating life. He had paid people to beat him nearly to death and leave him where he would be found, but without identification. Then he had heard her voice. I was prepared to die, he wrote, had arranged for it even. But then she began to read, and I found myself clinging to each word. Her stories were raw, honest, in a way I'd forgotten how to be. They reached into the darkness where I'd been hiding and pulled me back. Elena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the pages. Elliot described her exactly as she was, not the idealized version that admirers projected onto her, but the real Elena, the one who worked too hard, who kept people at a distance, who saved her tenderness for patients and stories, never for herself. She read late into the night, alternating between anger at his deception and a strange, painful understanding. Elliot Blake had been broken before she ever met him. Famous, wealthy, and completely alone. When she reached the chapter about their elevator kiss, Elena nearly closed the laptop. The scene was written from his perspective, not lurid or exploitative, but achingly vulnerable. Her pulse beneath my fingers was the first real thing I'd felt in years, he wrote. Each heartbeat, a reminder that I was, against all my plans, still alive, still capable of wanting something other than escape. He described the texture of her hair, the small sound she made when he kissed her, the way her doctor's hands that stitched wounds and saved lives, had trembled against his chest. Elena pressed her own fingers to her lips, remembering. Despite everything, the memory still sent heat coursing through her. The manuscript ended with their rooftop confrontation. The final line read, "And so I lost her before I ever truly had her. Punishment, perhaps, for a lifetime of hiding behind words instead of speaking truths." Elena sat in silence, the empty wine glass forgotten beside her. Dawn was breaking outside, her window casting gray light across her living room. Her phone chimed, a text from the hospital. Miguel was asking for her. His treatment would begin today. As she showered and dressed, Elena's mind churned. Elliot Blake had used her, lied to her. But he had also seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else ever had. And now he was using his wealth to save Miguel, to save the pediatric wing, perhaps to save the entire failing hospital. Did that excuse his deception? No. Did it complicate her anger? Absolutely. At the hospital, Elena found Miguel sitting up in bed, excitedly explaining. His new treatment to a stuffed dragon, the one Elliot had given him. "Dr. Elena." The boy's face lit up. "Look what came for you." On the bedside table sat a small package with her name. Inside was a fountain pen, vintage and elegant, with a note. "For the next chapter, whatever you decide it should be. I'm at the Grand Hotel if you want to talk. Room 1203. EB Elena slipped the pen into her pocket. The weight of it felt significant, like a decision already half made. "Miguel," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Do you miss your friend?" "From room 203. The boy nodded solemnly. "He told me he had to go away to fix a mistake. Is he coming back?" Elena looked out the window, toward the city skyline where the Grand Hotel stood. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly, "but I think I need to find out." "For the story?" Miguel asked. Elena smiled faintly. "For the truth." The Grand Hotel lobby gleamed with old-world luxury, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and staff who pretended not to notice Elena in her wrinkled scrubs. She had come directly from a 12-hour shift, giving herself no time to change or reconsider. Room 1203. The numbers seemed deliberate, an echo of where they had met. Her knuckles had barely touched the door when it opened. Elliot stood before her, dressed simply in a gray sweater and dark jeans. No longer a patient, no longer pretending. "You came," he said, the same words he'd spoken on the hospital roof. Elena stepped past him into the suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Detroit's skyline, the hospital visible in the distance. On a desk by the window lay stacks of papers, legal documents from the look of them. "I read your manuscript," she said, turning to face him. "All of it? Enough to understand you're either delusional or suicidal. Possibly both." Elliot ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from their hospital encounters that Elena felt a pang of unwanted emotion. "I won't deny either accusation," he said. "Before I woke up in your hospital, I was lost. Successful, yes, but empty. I hadn't written anything worth reading in years." He moved toward the desk. "But that's not why I asked you here." "Why, then?" He handed her a newspaper. The headline made her blood run cold. "Detroit Memorial to close pediatric wing. This can't happen," she said, scanning the article. "There are children like Miguel who—" "I know." Elliot gestured to the papers on the desk. "That's why I've called a press conference for this afternoon. As the majority shareholder of DMH Holdings." Elena stared at him. "DMH? The company trying to buy the hospital?" "The company that already owns it," he corrected. "I bought controlling interest 6 months ago." The betrayal struck fresh. "So all this time, while doctors were being laid off and patients transferred, while we fought to keep essential services running, you were behind it?" "No." His voice hardened. "I purchased shares to prevent a complete shutdown. The board has been acting against my explicit instructions, which is why I'm dissolving it." Today, Elena wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. "Why should I trust anything you say?" she asked. "You lied about who you were. You manipulated your way into my life, my stories." "I never lied about how I felt," he interrupted. "Everything in that manuscript is true, especially the parts about you." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken words. Elena forced herself to focus on the newspaper, on Miguel, on all the patients depending on Detroit Memorial. "What will happen at this press conference?" "I'm announcing a restructuring. The hospital will be placed under a non-profit trust. New management, proper funding." He hesitated. "I was hoping you would be there." "As what? Window dressing? The doctor who foolishly fell for as the new chief of medicine," he said quietly. "If you'll accept." The hospital auditorium hadn't been used in years. Dust covered the folding chairs hastily arranged for the press. Doctors and nurses stood along the walls, whispering suspiciously. Elena sat in the front row, still processing. Elliot's offer, chief of medicine. The position she'd aspired to someday, being handed to her now. Was it a genuine opportunity or another manipulation? Her thoughts scattered as Elliot took the podium. In his tailored suit and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked nothing like the patient from room 203. Yet when his eyes found hers in the crowd, something intimate passed between them, a recognition that transcended his disguise. "Many of you don't know me," he began, Though I've been a patient in this hospital for the past month, my name is Elliot Blake, and I am the majority shareholder of DMH Holdings. Murmurs rippled through the audience. What you do know is that Detroit Memorial has been systematically gutted by mismanagement and corporate greed. What you may not know is that this was never my intention when I acquired shares. He outlined his plan with precision: the dissolution of the current board, the creation of a trust to protect the hospital from future takeovers, and a personal donation of $20 million to renovate the pediatric wing. This hospital saved my life, he said, his gaze returning to Elena. Not just physically. The doctors, nurses, and patients here reminded me what matters. Especially one doctor who showed me that honesty and care are not just professional obligations, but personal ones. Heat crept up Elena's neck. The entire room seemed to look at her. When the formal remarks ended and the press began shouting questions, Elliot gestured for Elena to join him. She hesitated, then rose and walked to the podium. Dr. Rivas will be overseeing the transition. As our new chief of medicine, he announced, all operational questions should be directed to her. Before she could protest being volunteered, he squeezed her hand and whispered, I'll explain everything after, I promise. Just trust me one last time. The press conference stretched for hours. By the time Elena escaped to the hospital roof, her unofficial sanctuary, the sun was setting over Detroit. She didn't need to turn when the door opened behind her. She knew his footsteps now. You threw me to the wolves down there, she said. You handled them brilliantly. Elliot joined her at the railing. The board is already calling, begging to keep their positions. And Miguel, the other transfer patients, already being contacted. No one leaves unless they choose to. Elena nodded, relief washing through her. Whatever Elliot's motives, he was saving her hospital, saving her patients. Why didn't you tell me who you were from the beginning? She finally asked. After you woke up, when you could see what the hospital meant to me, would you have believed me? A concussed man claiming to be a reclusive billionaire? I might have. You would have treated me differently. I needed... He stopped, searching for words. I needed you to see me. Not my money or my name. Just me. The way you saw me, she said softly. Yes. The admission hung between them, simple and devastating. Elena turned to face him fully. I'm still angry, she said. You took my stories without permission. You lied about who you were. I know. And this promotion. I don't want special treatment because of what happened between us. Elliot stepped closer. The promotion is because you're the best doctor in this hospital. What happened between us is separate. Is it? No, he admitted. Nothing about you has ever been separate from the rest of me. Not from the moment you started reading to a man you thought couldn't hear you. His hand moved to her face, thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture now familiar. Elena closed her eyes. I hate you, she whispered, for making me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. But I do exist, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You're the one who brought me back to life. That part was always real. When his lips met hers, Elena didn't pull away. This kiss was different. Not desperate like in the elevator, not heated like on the roof. This was a beginning, a question, a possibility. Elena answered by winding her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. Whatever happened next, with the hospital, with his manuscript, with their tangled histories, would be complicated. But this, the feel of him against her, his breath mingling with hers, was startlingly simple. She kissed him as if closing a chapter, or perhaps opening a new one entirely. Look what I can do! Miguel's voice echoed through the newly renovated pediatric wing, bright with murals and modern equipment. 3 months post-surgery, he raced down the hallway, his dragon plushie clutched in one hand. Elena watched from the nurse's station, clipboard forgotten in her hands. The experimental treatment funded by what she now knew was an anonymous donation from Elliot, had worked beyond anyone's expectations. Miguel's kidneys were functioning almost normally. "Careful," she called as he spun in a circle. "You're still healing." "Dr. Blake says I'm stronger than I look," the boy replied, beaming. Dr. Blake. The name still felt strange to her. After the press conference, Elliot had made good on every promise. The trust was established, the board replaced, and the hospital transformed. He had also resumed his public identity, though with notable differences. The reclusive author now gave interviews, attended hospital fundraisers, and most surprisingly, taught a weekly creative writing workshop for long-term patients. Elena's promotion to chief of medicine had come with challenges. Some staff whispered about favoritism, about her relationship with the hospital's savior. She had worked twice as hard to prove her qualifications, often staying long after her shifts ended. Like tonight. "Miguel, it's almost 8. Your aunt will be here soon." She gestured to the nurse's station. "Why don't you draw while you wait?" As the boy settled with his crayons, Elena's phone chimed with a text. "Still at work? Look outside." She moved to the window. In the parking lot. Below, Elliot leaned against his car, 2 coffee cups in hand, looking up at her office. Even from 3 stories up, their eyes met with practiced ease. "Give me 10 minutes, she texted back. They had been cautious these past months, building something real amidst the complications of hospital politics and public scrutiny. Their relationship evolved in stolen moments. Late dinners in her office, early morning walks before rounds, weekends at his lake house where no one knew them as Dr. Rivas and Elliot Blake. "Miguel, I need to finish something," she said, gathering her files. "Tell Nurse Rachel I'll be back soon." The boy nodded absently, focused on his drawing. A dragon, flying over what looked like a hospital. Elliot waited beside the staff entrance, their usual meeting spot. He had abandoned the expensive suits of his public persona, returning to the simpler style he'd worn as Luke. The coffee he handed her was still hot. "You're working late again," he said, not a criticism, but an observation. "Budget meeting tomorrow." Elena sipped the coffee, prepared exactly as she liked it. "The cardiology department wants a new MRI machine." "And does the chief of medicine think that's a good investment?" "The chief of medicine thinks they should repair the one they have first." She smiled. "But don't worry, I'm not asking the trust for more money." They walked together through the parking lot, a comfortable silence between them. These quiet moments had become precious. No hospital politics, no public scrutiny, just them. "I have something for you," Elliot said as they reached his car. He handed her a thick envelope. Inside was a copy of The New Yorker. Elena's breath caught as she saw the table of contents, her name alongside Elliot's. "You published it." "We published it," he corrected. "Your story, my edits, just as we discussed." The story was one from her notebook, refined during late-night editing sessions at his apartment. She had finally shown him all her writing, not just the fragments he'd overheard from his hospital bed. "There's more," he said, gesturing to the envelope. Beneath the magazine was a key attached to a note. "The story only begins when you say yes." Elena looked up, confused. Elliot nodded toward the car. "Let me show you." They drove through the city, past neighborhoods transformed by the Blake Foundation's urban renewal projects, to a tree-lined street of brownstones. Elliot parked in front of one with a bright red door. "Whose house is this?" Elena asked as they climbed the steps. "That depends on your answer." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "It could be yours, or ours." The key fit perfectly. Inside, the brownstone was warm and filled with books, shelves lining every wall, ladders to reach the highest ones, a writer's home, a reader's sanctuary. "You bought this?" Elena wandered through the front rooms, touching spines of first editions mixed with paperbacks. "I thought..." Elliot cleared his throat. "You've been staying at my place more often, but it never felt like yours." This could be something we build together. In the living room, an old record player sat beside two comfortable chairs. Elliot put on a vinyl, something soft and jazzy, and held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Elena stepped into his arms, the familiar scent of him enveloping her. They swayed slowly, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat, still quickening at her touch, just as it had in room 203. "Didn't answer," he murmured into her hair. "About the house." Elena pulled back just enough to see his face. The confident author, the powerful businessman, both disappeared in these private moments, leaving only the man who had listened to her stories in the dark. "It's a big step," she said, "living together. We've faced bigger ones." His hands tightened, slightly at her waist. "Hospital takeovers, public scrutiny, my attempts at cooking." She laughed, leaning into him. "Your cooking is the biggest challenge of all." The music continued as they moved toward the back of the house, through a kitchen with copper pots hanging above a center island, to double doors opening onto a small garden terrace. String lights twinkled in the trees, illuminating a table set for dinner. "You planned all this," Elena said. "I hoped." Elliot's voice was soft. "I've been doing a lot of that since I met you." They ate beneath the stars, talking about the hospital, his new book, her research. The easy conversation of two, people no longer hiding from each other. After dinner, they returned to the living room with glasses of wine. Elliot added another record to the player while Elena explored the bookshelves. Her fingers trailed over a leather-bound notebook, identical to the one she'd read from in room 203. "Open it," he said, joining her. Inside were blank pages, save for an inscription, "For our story, the one we write together." Elena placed the notebook on a side table and reached for him, unbuttoning his shirt slowly. When she pressed her face against his bare chest, Elliot's breath caught. "Here is the only place I want to keep you," he whispered, echoing the words from her dreams. Her mouth found his in the dim light, no longer cautious. Their kisses deepened as they moved toward the stairs, articles of clothing discarded along the way, her cardigan, his belt, barriers falling one by one. In the bedroom, moonlight spilled across a king-sized bed, a stark contrast to the narrow hospital cot where they had first connected. Elliot drew her down beside him, his hands rediscovering every curve he had only imagined during those early days. "Yes," Elena whispered against his mouth. "Yes to—" His question trailed off as her lips moved to his neck. Everything. The house, us, all of it. Morning found them tangled in sheets, Elena's head on Elliot's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She watched the sunrise paint gold across his sleeping face, thinking of all the chapters that had brought them here, from a hospital bed to a home they would share. Later, as coffee brewed in their new kitchen, Eleanor found herself drawn to the leather notebook. Sitting at a desk overlooking the garden, she uncapped the fountain pen he had given her months ago and began to write. Chapter 1. The doctor and the man who didn't know how to love Elliot found her there, lost in words. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, reading over her shoulder. "A good beginning?" he asked. Elena smiled up at him, the man who had once been her mysterious patient, now becoming her partner in all things. "The best," she replied, "but nowhere near the end."